What a wonderful atmosphere that's here on this sunny, snowy night. And of course, I'm always interested, and this is the first event of our winter season, so I'm pleased to see so many of you responding to it. I am interested in knowing, where did you hear about it? How many heard about it through our brochure? Oh, good. How many heard about it in another way? My sister, okay. Another one?
Newspaper.
The newspaper, email, okay, good. Any other ways? Newspaper. All right, welcome. Well, good. Well, this evening we have a real person who has been to the Paris talk. She took the thing called the human, the 215 climate change. Now, you already, those of you who know her will know that she learned her love for the earth, or for ecology, or for the environment when she was knee-high to a grasshopper. Right? She comes from OP, Kansas. Now, let me ask you, how many people have been there? Well, there are a few. How many even know about it? Okay, a few more know about it. Well, I'll let her tell about OP because it's not real big. But she serves right now as the executive director of New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light. And she's going to be giving us a few insights on where we can go from here from the Paris event. So, Joan Brown.
Well, welcome everyone, and it's a joy to be here tonight. And thank you for coming out, because the weather has gotten a little I want to say New Mexican, a little Minnesotan. You all are used to that. New Mexico we wouldn't be, but you are. So it's great to be here. So what I'd like to do, first of all, is anybody else here, has anybody else that's here, were you in Paris by any chance? No, I'm not being facetious, because there were a lot of business people there and others, and I just kind of want to take a pulse. Okay. So what I'm going to do tonight is I'm going to give kind of just an overview of what I did in Paris, and I'm going to give some major points that came out of the UN climate change agreement, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about some reflections that I had and some actions that you might take. But then I'm going to open it up to questions and discussion. So I hope you have some good questions, discussion items. I want to hear your insights, because this agreement is all of our agreements. It's all of our calls to love. It's our common home. And so we all need to be engaged in this. And if we're really going to address climate change and really put in action love for our brothers and sisters and for our earth, we all need to be engaged in this. So welcome, and we'll just start. So some of you might be aware that these negotiations addressing climate change really had a beginning with a Rio conference in 1992, and from there they decided that, the world decided that we needed to have, come to some kind of agreement or ways of addressing this issue that was facing us. And at that point it wasn't as paramount as it is now. And so we've had 21, COP21 means conference of parties, 21 of these conference of parties from the UN meetings. And I also was in Copenhagen in 2009, where everyone was very hopeful that something might happen because the world desperately needed it. And I have to say it was a disaster. At the time, we didn't use that word quite so strongly because we have to go somewhere. We can't not do anything, but it was a disaster. Nothing came from that. So from that meeting, they strategized how could we go forward to come up with one international agreement with so much diversity around the world, with developing nations, developed countries, such economic disparities, island nations that are submerging, droughts, industrialized countries, different political situations like in the US or Europe or China. I mean, such diversity. And so 4 years ago in Durban, South Africa, they came up with a group of people and started working towards the Paris meeting. And their decision was that they would work towards this agreement in a different way than they had, say, with Kyoto, which the United States never ratified, and which never became a binding agreement because it didn't happen in everybody's eyes. So how could we come up with an agreement in everybody's eyes? So that's kind of what the story is going to be about tonight, but I also want to give some context, okay? So I want to also say that I am just very grateful to my community of Franciscans for sponsoring me to go to this conference, and for Interfaith Power and Life for being supportive, and I did some things with them there as well, and for my New Mexico Interfaith Power and My People for being so supportive and allowing me to be gone for 2 weeks to Paris and not be doing work on the ground there in New Mexico. So I'm very grateful for that opportunity. And I went, in these conferences, there are official delegates who are doing the negotiations, and then there are a variety of other groups, and one of those is NGOs, or non-governmental organizations. And and those are the people, only people, and they're very limited, who can get inside to the actual COP meetings and can have some influence with the delegates, etc. Even though there's been tremendous amount of work leading up to this conference, and there has to be afterwards as well. So I went as an official delegate with Franciscans International. And this is my friend Odile, and she is French. And so it was wonderful to have somebody who had lived in Paris and knew Paris and was French. But I didn't go everywhere with her, and I don't speak French, but I got along okay, so I was all right, somehow. And but Odile works at Franciscans International at the UN in New York now. And Franciscans International has an office in New York and also in Geneva. They work on issues like climate change, human rights, those kind of areas. And so the first week that I was there, I was actually involved with some things with Franciscans International. And there was a group of Franciscans, lay and religious, from all over the world. And here are a few of them. And so I was with them for several days. And they were from Australia and Holland, India, Africa, Belgium, Europe, France, and South Latin America. And they were there because of the COP meeting. And they were learning why and how Franciscans really need to be more involved in climate change. And so I gave a presentation for them at one of their, with a lot of people in a parish, for a couple hundred people a day. They were most interested in the interfaith work because they had not heard of that, and just found that that was very important and could be a way of addressing some of the other challenges that we have in our world with violence, and especially because we all share the earth in common. So here we are, though, in front of Notre Dame. So the COP itself is one thing, and then the other part of the COP are many, many, many other events going on, both all over the city of Paris that we had to find our way to. This was an ecumenical event at Notre Dame that we had one night. It was quite beautiful and amazing, and so we were waiting to go in. This is the Franciscan event where I was offering what faith communities in the United States are doing and how they're working interfaith in their congregations to address energy efficiency, renewable energy, working on public policy advocacy, etc. There are also events going on at the COP in the civilian or civil society segment, which you don't have to be monitored to go in or certified or approved ahead of time. And so there were many civic society people, and there were lots of workshops, there were different demonstrations, and there was a large contingency of Episcopalians at the conference. And some of them really wanted to be official delegates, but they couldn't get in, so they were here, and they had a prayer service every day at noon. And so these are some Episcopal friends having this prayer service, and I joined them with the director of Interfaith Power and Light and the founders, Reverend Sally Bingham, who was an Episcopal minister one day. So just to say, there are all these different things going on. There were events. There were 2 days of a mock trial. Well, I shouldn't even say mock. It was a trial for Mother Earth and violations against Mother Earth, where all kinds of people testified and told of atrocities that were happening in their countries. And all this is international. There are people from more than 195 countries gathered for this COP event and all the other events going on. So it really was phenomenal. This is inside the green zone, that civic area, and this is a tree with wishes and prayers for everyone inside the event. They try to also model what we need to be doing, how we need to be living with our lifestyles. So these little trees in the back were a project that captures wind, and they're explaining the different elements that it can power just through these wind trees. And this was outside of the COP buildings. One weekend, there was an event in a place called Montreal, a section of the city, and it was all kinds of creative, sustainable things going on in France. And it was put on by the Civic Society, and there were talks and everything as well. And there was transition. We were next, the Franciscans International had a booth, and we were the only religious booth that I knew of. But it was really important to be there because people were very fascinated and interested. But we were right next to a transition town booth where all these young people would come together on weekends, and they create these natural kind of food things. And so they brought samples of all of it and shared it. And so that's what they were doing. There was a lot of art throughout the city, and this was in that area on that weekend. And this was a Statue of Liberty. And these are refugees, climate refugees, which currently are not recognized as refugees under the UN or anywhere. And Lady Liberty says freedom to pollute. So there was a lot of political art trying to make statements and messages. And we have a polar bear here, but this was a very powerful display. At this event, there was so much creativity. There was theater all over the place. And this was a theater with Miss Plastic, trying to say we need to keep plastic, and had a gigantic shopping cart in plastic, and the children are involved, and they're saying, well, what can we do instead of using plastic, or what do we need to do with it? So it's again addressing these everyday, ordinary things that we need to look at to address climate change. This I found fascinating, and while I'm familiar with these, many people here probably aren't. And this would never be allowed in the United States, unfortunately. But it was a composting toilets. So there were thousands of people going through this event that day. And they had a number of composting toilets there. They had these young people, it was great. They had the sawdust, and every time you'd go in, and somebody came out, and they took their little brush and made sure the sawdust was clean, and they were all happy, and inviting everybody just to go on, and it was great. So very creative kind of things. And again, there was art all over the city. I stayed with Missionaries of Mary, and every day to get to the train, I walked past this particular art display that was in a lake in this park near where they lived. And there were probably 50 of these gentlemen in the lake in various levels of water, talking about all the peoples and the island nations that are being flooded because of climate change. And so this was an artistic way of saying this. And I felt that it went very well with what Pope Francis, whom, is everybody familiar with Laudato Si?
Yeah.
Okay, with the encyclical Laudato Si, our common home, care of our common home. And right as the conference was beginning, Pope Francis made a very strong statement. And he said, every year the problems, meaning climate change, are more grave. Politicians have done little to address the situation. We are at a limit. We are at the limit of a suicide, to say a strong word. I'm sure that almost all who are in Paris have this awareness and want to do something. So in the midst of the reality and calling it like it is, he also continues to say, I believe people have good hearts, they know what it means to love our neighbor and love the earth, and we will do the right thing. So, into the actual COP itself. So, I was taken by these bakers. And you could see them baking every day, and they baked 10,000 breads a day just for the delegates in the COP. And so one day I wanted to take a picture, and this nice young man just posed for me. And I was trying to think of, at the end of the COP, what would be a symbol that could really depict this historic moment and this event, which is not perfect by any means. And it came to me, everybody was eating bread, and everywhere you went, because there was hardly any time to eat, you had these long sandwiches with cheese in them or vegetables or whatever, and everybody was munching away on this bread. And it came to me that this was really a sacred bread moment of the entire planet. 195 nations, usually eating different kinds of bread every day, but this day, these 2 weeks, they sat at the same table, compromised, as difficult as that was, to share the bread of negotiations in Paris for the world in our common home. So just a little context going into this, because I would assume most of you know something or quite a bit about climate change, is that right? Yeah, I just want to put some context, because it really is more than statistics, it really is the stories and the people. So this was a wonderful woman that I met at a Gender Day, a Women's Day, and she was honored as a leader from the Carteret Islands, which are part of Papua New Guinea. They are really the first island peoples that have had to move. And the elders decided they just had to do this. So they're the first environmental refugees. I mentioned earlier, the UN does not have a category for climate refugees. Now, if you're a refugee status, you have more opportunities for you and designation, but that designation does not exist at this point. So they had to find a place to move. It meant that they lost their culture, their stories, their everything, because their island nation was submerged, or getting submerged. So they named their committee, or their council, Tulela Feisa, which means sailing the waves on our own. So sometimes people think, well, these people, oh, you know, they just, you know, they're making this up, or they just really, you know, want to get to some country where it's much wealthier, like they want to come to the United States or whatever. Well, no, they really want to be on their own. This woman, Ursula, was honored, and she was honored because of her determination. Just since they've moved, and there's a film out about the whole process of them moving, they had planted some 7,000 trees where they had to move to, fruit and nut trees, to help provide food for them, because they're used to providing their own food. And they planted about 1,500 to 2,000 coca trees so that they can have an income and a source of economy. And this strong woman, in the midst of this great sorrow, said, you know, we just have to keep doing things, and for the future and for our children. And our children need to learn and study about renewable energy so that they have a future. And we women have to do it, and the women are not going to be stopped. And that's what she said. So, just a little aside there. So, some of the, what I consider 5 of maybe the key things that came out of this climate agreement, I'm just going to go through these rather quickly here. So first of all, I'm doing it with some pictures, and I want to, this was a wonderful, again, there are all kinds of artistic, political ways that they were trying to get to the delegates from countries so that their consciences would be jarred, because they're in there negotiating, and it's hard, and it's like you can get in a bubble. So this one was done by Oxfam, which is a great organization, and it's the world leaders. And so somebody was saying, oh, it's time to wake up, you've slept enough, now come on, stretch your arms, stretch your, and this was outside, so it was great. But I thought it was very good in depicting it is time for us to wake up. And at this conference, people did wake up, the delegates, and because of a lot of civil society pushing faith communities as well. So one of the most important things that happened at this, which everybody was very surprised that it happened, was the goal of trying to not move our temperature increase up to 2 degrees Celsius or 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And what was even more surprising was that the aspirational goal is 1.5 degrees. And that was what was being demanded by the vulnerable nations. Now, I must say that the vulnerable nations, at the beginning of this conference, there is something called, I'll explain this more in a minute, indices, but plans had to be submitted by all of these countries beforehand, what they were going to do to stop climate change or to curb their emissions and to address adaptation mitigation. And of the 160 some at the beginning of the conference that had submitted, 121 of them were developing nations. I thought that was very telling. And a very important thing for us to remember, we are not the whole world. And there are many differing views and points and needs, and for us to somehow hold all of that. So those vulnerable nations, though, throughout they kept petitioning and saying, this was their slogan, 1.5 to stay alive. And they literally mean to stay alive, whether it's in drought-ridden areas or areas prone to floods or submerging nations. So this is very significant, but even with this, in this agreement, it does not lay out enough strategies or enough, there's not enough meat in it to get to even get halfway to this place, to keep the temperature down that much. And at this point, we're about 1 degree above. And we're already seeing the effects of our climate shifting and what that means. Another important point, number 2, was that there are ratcheting up mechanisms built within the agreement. So what that means is you might watch for the news as the year goes on, as other years, you might hear the word indices, or the acronym indices. What that means is intended nationally determined commitments. That's those commitments that each of these nations came up with and they submitted. And it was decided to do it this way because of the great diversity throughout the planet, and that maybe with this we can come to an agreement. And the other thing is we also had to work, the U.S. was very strong in our voice, and we said there's no way that we're going to get a treaty ratified and through our Congress, which is very true. So you have to try the strategies. So this was the strategies, these indices. But with them, there are time frames that call for a legally binding accountability. So for instance, in 2018, all of these nations come back together with their indices, and they're hoping because of how rapidly technology is shifting, how people are seeing that this is a huge problem, that even in 2 years, they'll come back with stronger indices than they have now, which will help us try to meet this goal of 2 degrees 1.5, to keep it below that. And then from there on, there are timelines. So by 2020, they will come back with legally bound to say what they have done, or how they're ratcheting up their indices. And by 2023, all of the nations have to come back and will be accountable for reporting what actually has happened. And they're working in ways to document all of that. So this was really important. And I have this picture of this wonderful young woman from Bangladesh. And I thought this was just very significant. So this is in a section where they're talking about adaptation and mitigation. And in Bangladesh, which is probably the poorest, one of the poorest countries in the entire world and densely populated, and they are being shrunk, there's no land to go, and they're being inundated by seawater. And there's lots of challenges with Muslim and Hindu, and so there's really no place for them to go. But they're installing solar panels, 60 to 70,000 a month on buildings. And so I said to the woman, I said, well, what about those who are very, very poor? She said, the government is giving them solar panels. So some of these developing countries are jumping over the fossil fuel industry. Okay, financial assistance was a big thing, and I was part of several groups with faith leaders and other NGOs meeting actually with the chief negotiator and for the U.S. and their staff, and also with some Congress people's staff on some of these issues. Finance was one of them. Because the United States was not anteing up this. Some of you might have signed petitions or something for the Green Climate Fund. It was being promoted by a lot of faith communities, by Oxfam. which would have called for $400 million for adaptation for people that need it in these developing countries that are being inundated. It hadn't passed through Congress. And John Kerry, while he was there, he was there the entire 2 weeks, which is also quite significant, along with Al Gore, to help with the negotiations. So he, one day, he said, we're going to give $800 million to the United States as part of our promise, because you have to bring something to the table. So that was one of the things we brought to the table. One of the other things the U.S. brought to the table happened a year ago, last fall, when we had bilateral negotiations with China, the head of China, and we both said we're going to address our carbon emissions. That was another thing that we brought to the table. Another thing we brought to the table was the Clean Power Plan that all of us need to be aware of. And the Clean Power Plan, I know you're starting to have listening sessions here in Minnesota. It would be important to go to those listening sessions. They are for your state, how you're going to come up with reaching your targets on reducing carbon emissions in coal-fired power plants, for instance. So keep an eye about those. It's very, very important for civil society to be at those kind of meetings. But so just to say, the financing was very important. Finally decided upon that there would be coming back to the table, ramping up the money for adaptation mitigation every 5 years. An amount was not put in the official document. It was in the preamble, though. For the first time, even developing nations are putting in some money to help with this, which is amazing because they don't have the money that some of us have. But that was the only way they could come to an agreement. So there's all of this kind of give and take in order to get negotiations done. And so again, there was all kinds of civic society pushing for the finance. And again, this was another area we were negotiating on because we were trying to push for equal financing for adaptation and mitigation. Mitigation is much easier. That means we're going to keep the carbon emissions down. A lot of industry is very supportive of that because it means more business for solar panels, renewable energy, all of these things, and it's usually loans. The adaptation part is not as popular with business, and it means there need to be some grants for people. They're not getting loans, but grants. They're not able to overcome the climate change. Somehow they're going to have to adapt. It might mean that they need to move their island nation. So that's a huge issue. I think we're on the fourth element. This was a strong message that fossil fuels need to stay in the ground. Fossil fuels are on their way out. And this is the long-term goal of the agreement. It is a strong signal to world capitals, financial markets, that a massive scaling up of investment for clean energy is necessary, with an aim for global peaking of greenhouse gases as soon as possible. Again, a date was not given. It's going to be different for each country and each nation. And that within this, we also need to care for this transition in jobs and poverty and economy. And so all of that was in this. The pictures here are, I was very impressed. This was a rancher from Wyoming talking about hydraulic fracturing and how it not only destroyed his land, but it destroyed his community and pitted one against the other, and he said, it has to go. He said, it is just destroying my land and my farm and all. And then these were people drawing a line, a red line. There was hundreds of people in the COP area stating that we have to draw the line somewhere and to keep fossil fuels in the ground. Another element we worked really hard on, and this is amazing that it got in, was loss and damage. Loss and damage means that those countries that are suffering the most from climate change and have maybe zero emissions, like the Carteret Island, say we need some recompense. We haven't, the human-induced part of climate change, which is a great deal of it, we have not contributed to that, yet we're the ones that are suffering. The developing countries, cried for compensation, loss and damage. Loss and damage was put in as a separate section into the agreement, which is phenomenal, but there's no money attached. And the United States says there can't be any money attached because that would make this a document. It would have to go before our Congress and would be have to have approval by, and we can't do that, it won't happen, so it can't happen. So, but what it does allow is that as we go into the future, this is there, it can be talked about. Things say, for instance, that there's no designation for climate refugees can be at least addressed, because everything that's written into the body of the document can be worked with. So these are some indigenous people outside of the beginning of where you walked into the coffin. There's this enormous polar bear there where they had a lot of witnesses and demonstrations. So a few reflections after the coffin is celebrating, and I have to say, when the document, and again, it came after the delegates working for 3 days straight, even through the night on this document. The French facilitators and leaders and the French president were not going to let anybody off. It had to be done. It lasted, the conference lasted a day, more than it was. I had built in 1 day maybe to see a museum or something in Paris. Well, I spent the day till 11 or so at night inside the COP on that Saturday. But it was worth it, and it was phenomenal. Thousands and thousands of people on their feet. Recognizing this is not a perfect document by any means, but it's the best we can do now. We have something to work with. It was amazing. And so these are just some pictures of that. And this is me with one of our Unitarian friends. We had a number of Unitarians there. There were religious people from the Methodist, Unitarians, women's religious communities, Catholic, Quakers, Episcopalians. Inside the COP, I did not run into any Jewish delegates. In the green zone, in the civic area, there were. And there were some IPL, Interfaith Power and Light folks who were Jewish. So after the COP, some reflections. Oh, this is still the COP. This is, you know, again, kind of the team, the negotiating team up on stage celebrating the event. I think it calls for continued hope and courage and dialogue. And this is a responsibility of all of us. And I was very moved by two women from Durban, South Africa, who spoke after the agreement was shared. And they said, this is the best we can do now. This is not perfect, but we have an agreement. And then they quoted this quote from Nelson Mandela, which I think is very significant. I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way. But I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I've taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I have come. But I can only rest for a moment, for the freedom comes responsibilities, and I dare not linger, for my long walk is not ended. And I felt that that was very profound and also kind of focused what all of this hard work over years and years has been about, and the disappointments, and even disappointments at this meeting. I was sitting next to some people, that were quite disappointed at one point. But again, one of the signs in the COP, below 2 degrees, together we'll make it. And it has to be together, all of us. It's not leaders of nations, it's civic society, it's religious, it's all of us. So, some reflections. One, the religious voice, faith community voice and action were vital and very important in this COP. This was a press conference, and the gentleman, a French gentleman on your right, was one of the facilitators, and he was commending the faith communities for their work previous to this and at it. He said this is the first COP where the moral, ethical voice has been on the forefront the entire meeting. And he recognized different religious traditions, faith groups that were there and had been there and working on this. Also, the Laudato Si on care of our common home was noted numerous times. So that's very significant, and we need to continue our work with that. The civil society, especially those developing nations, were very significant in pushing for this agreement. Year after year after year pushing, and they had to give up a lot, unfortunately, even for us to get to this place. So their So I like this, keep your promises. Polluters out, people in. So those are civil society messages, and that is very significant and important in moving on. The individual and collective actions in addressing carbon emissions, sustainability, care for our neighbors, for the earth is quite significant, like the interfaith power and interfaith power like Paris Pledge. So another thing that I did when I was there, and I'm there in the middle with my head turned, but this is Reverend Sally Bingham and Susan Stevenson, who's the director of Interfaith Power Light nationally. We are in 40 states, including Minnesota. We have a great group here that organize out of the Twin Cities. But we've been collecting signatures from individuals. And so this was an 11-foot scroll that we unscrolled. The State Department asked us to give a presentation in the U.S. State Department pavilion or venue at the COP, inside the COP, on what faith communities are doing. So we did that, and as part of that, we unscrolled this Paris Pledge, and I have some in the back, and it's taking the Paris Pledge, and we're continuing to do this for individuals, and it means that I am going to figure out, I'm going to work at, and I'm going to invite others to work at, reducing my carbon emissions by 50% by 2030, and to net zero by 2050. Now, some older people that I've asked to sign this said, oh, 2050 is real easy. I'm going to be at zero real fast. So, but I said, well, your witness will still be alive. So, the other thing that's really, really important is that faith communities, faith organizations can sign this. And we have assistance on our website to help with this. Also, the EPA on their Energy Star site, there's a whole thing for faith communities on how to reduce your carbon emissions. What we're saying here is we're pushing our leaders to have these kind of goals. And if we're pushing them, we have to be doing it ourselves. And so this is saying, you know, we're doing it, you need to do it. And so, so far, it's really more like over 5,000 individuals have signed this and 175 congregations, and we're continuing to gather these commitments. And this is just at that presentation we did. Another thing that I